Alright, so today we're going to be installing some L-tracks inside of a truck bed to provide some additional storage capability so you can tie stuff down in the truck bed. You can really do this in anything that has sheet metal, and I'm going to be using rivet nuts in order to accomplish this, to actually get them installed. There are a couple of other ways that you can do this, including sheet metal screws, which are a little weak, or you can use bolt and nut combinations. But if you can't reach the other side of the sheet metal, that can be difficult to do. So first thing that you're going to need to do is make sure that you figure out where you want to install this. I've done this before on the deck system that I have in my truck, but I wanted to actually install it in the bed. And I figured that this back area up against the cab is going to be the best location for it. So I measured that first and tried to figure out where the center point was so that I could mark the center point and then line that up with the center point on the track itself. So as you can see here, again, this is a 2019 Raptor. I believe that this was 54 inches wide, this little indentation, which actually fit the L-track perfectly. So I marked the center point there, and then I went ahead and measured the length of the track itself. I'll put a link for what I actually used for the L-tracks, where I bought them from. This was a 48-inch L-track, so obviously the halfway point here would be 24 inches. And I went ahead and marked that also on the L-track itself. So once you mark both of those, you can go ahead and line them up and mark exactly where you're going to want to drill the holes. And yes, you are going to drill. Obviously, you have to drill into this thing. If you're using sheet metal screws, you're going to want to use a smaller drill bit, kind of like a pilot hole, at each of these mounting locations. But if you're using either the bolt and nut combination, or if you're going to be using rib nuts, they're going to be fairly large holes. And I decided to use rib nuts for the application, just because you can't really reach the other side of this easily without taking the truck bed off. And I didn't want to use sheet metal screws because I wanted to make sure it was as strong as possible. So go ahead and mark the location, and those are the spots that you're going to drill. If you've never drilled through metal before, I actually kind of found this out fairly recently. I have used normal drill bits before, and it's worked okay. Aluminum's pretty soft. That's what the bed is made of in these second-gen Raptors, or any of the F-150s from 2015 on. They're made of aluminum, which a lot of people give them crap for, but it's not a big deal. I mean, the Army's been using the Humvee, made in the 80s, has been aluminum the entire time, so this isn't the first truck to be made out of aluminum and to be used in heavy-duty applications. Alright, so you drill these holes, make sure that they match the a little bit bigger than the outer diameter of the rib nut. I was trying to make it to 3/8. I think the majority of the holes that I drilled here were a little bit larger. Here I just wanted to double check and make sure that I wasn't actually hitting the cab with this stepped up drill bit. This is a special drill bit that's meant for metal, which I highly recommend. They're really expensive, but I highly recommend getting those because it can be a challenge otherwise. You're supposed to be doing it lubed, so you should be using some sort of oil to assist you with drilling into metal, but I didn't end up doing that just because I didn't want all the metal shavings to stick together and cause a whole mess whenever I ended up vacuuming everything up. So when choosing the rib nuts for these, I actually got the rib nuts on Amazon. Again, I'll post a link. Because the bed is aluminum, I decided to go with aluminum rib nuts. It was a little sketchy for me considering this. I know you have the whole dissimilar metal problem, but you also have the problem of aluminum being very soft, which obviously causes a problem with rib nuts in general, but it's also an issue for threads. I did several tests before I decided to install this, and I came up with the idea, instead of using steel, I'll still go with the aluminum. Whenever I was drilling here, I found out that I was using masking tape to block off the stepped areas that I didn't want to cut past when drilling the holes. It didn't hold up, so I went and grabbed some more tape, a different type of tape that I was hoping was going to help me. It did not. So you have to go slow, and you have to be careful whenever you do this to make sure that you don't mess it up and you don't cut past where you want to cut. Because this is obviously going to affect how well the rivet nuts are secured, and how well they hold up over the life of the vehicle. So highly recommend just taking your time. Obviously still mark it off so you have an idea of where you're supposed to cut to. But taking your time is the biggest thing here. Sped this up a little bit. Again, after each hole I drilled, I verified to make sure that the hole wasn't too small, the rivet nut fit in there. And I think for the first like 5 of them, the holes were actually a little too big. I was kind of concerned, stressing out a little bit here that I drew up, or that I cut a hole that was too big. You can see me kind of wiggling them there, freaking out a little bit. It wasn't until right about here that I was like, alright, I should probably take my time. Go a little slower. And make sure that I got the exact correct width that I wanted. And I did that the rest of the way. So it took a while. This actually seemed very fast while I was doing it. I finished up and I was like, wow, that must have taken me only 10 minutes. I think it actually ended up taking me about 30 minutes to finish the whole thing from start to finish. Again, I did spend a while practicing this with a spare piece of sheet metal that I had, and testing out the rivets. Number one, testing them to make sure that I didn't pinch them too hard, which did happen on the first one that I tried to use, which ended up stripping out all of the threads just with the tool. But once I did it the second time, I figured out exactly where I needed to set up the rivet whenever I install it. And then I also tested it using a torque wrench to make sure that whenever I tightened down the bolt, I didn't over torque it to a point that the thread started ripping out. And I tested that multiple times to make sure that everything was good to go. So here I'm putting the Rivet Nut onto the Rivet Nut Tool. I bought this tool at Harbor Freight. The tool's a little short, which can cause you issues with getting leverage exactly where you need it in order to squeeze it tightly. But again, aluminum is pretty soft, so I didn't have any problems. I think if the Rivet Nut was steel, it would be much more challenging, and I'd have some difficulty actually squeezing it all the way down. But this wasn't terrible. I knew exactly where to stop squeezing just based on the testing that I did, and I was able to kind of loosen it up and pull the tool out. So for that reason, I do highly recommend that you test this out first on whatever spare piece of sheet metal or whatever you have that you can use to test this, just to make sure that you don't mess it up whenever you actually do it on your vehicle. If I had done this the first time, or done the first rivet nut on the truck, I would have had a panic attack. And I was kind of prepared for that. I thought, you know, if I mess this up, I'm gonna have to drill the thing out, and then I'll probably have to figure out how to fit a nut and bolt combo on the back side of the truck bed toward the cab. So I was prepared for that whenever I decided to do this. Now that I have done it, I think I'm a lot more confident, and I would be okay with doing it again on, let's say, on the truck bed sides, which may end up being another location that I install the riv nuts and L-tracks. You can see after I installed each one of these, I wanted to make sure, just because a lot of the holes were a lot larger than the riv nuts themselves. I mean, they still expanded, and everything was very tight, and I had no issues with it slipping through or anything like that, but I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't wiggling in there and that I actually applied enough pressure to properly seal that up. So there you go. You get all the riv nuts installed. Looks super professional. Again, because they were aluminum, so the L-tracks themselves are aluminum. I already knew that. The bed's aluminum. I went with the aluminum riv nuts, so I didn't have any problems. And then these are zinc-coated little steel bolts in 1/4 inch. Again, because this is a small Harbor Freight Rivet Nut Tool, it can only go up to 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch 20. So that's what I ended up using for all the hardware. The Rivet Nuts. Again, so I think Riv Nut is an actual brand name. So these are Rivet Nuts. On this particular one, I noticed that I think this one hole didn't line up perfectly, but the rest of them did. I moved on just because I thought maybe I had slightly cross-threaded it. Again, the scary thing with anything aluminum is that you're going to cross-thread it and mess it up. So I installed the rest of the bolts, and then at the end went back to try and screw that in. Kind of realized there was a misalignment, so I decided it was better for me to try and loosen up the rest of them before I decided to torque really hard on that final bolt and possibly mess something up. So I loosened it, tried to move it over, screwed the last one in. It was still pretty tight, but I didn't think it was a significant concern, so I decided to screw it the rest of the way in. These bolts are Phillips head drive, which probably aren't my first choice. I am going to swap them out later for some hex drive bolts, just so there's less of a chance for them to strip out on the head. So I used a torque wrench here. I did get the torque wrench in testing all the way up to 90 inch-pounds, or I think it was 95 inch-pounds before it decided to strip out. And I just kept slowly going up and up and up. I felt like they were significant. They were really tight at anything above 40 inch-pounds. So I decided to just go with 50 inch-pounds. That way, it was a solid middle ground of definitely tight and solid, but nothing too crazy. And I just torqued each of these down to 50 inch-pounds. You'll notice that I'm actually missing 2 bolts. I did put the riv nuts in there, but I didn't have enough bolts whenever I looked through all of my extra bolts that I had lying around. So I ended up buying some a little bit later and installing those later, but it worked out. And here's one of the tie-down clips that comes with, or that you can purchase for these tracks. You can also buy some attachments that provide a bolt-on application. So if you want to install something that you can screw in, or bolt in rather, but that can also be removed easily, you can do that. So these have a lot of functionality. I actually really like the L tracks for their capabilities. So that's it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and this is useful to anyone who is looking to add some L tracks for some tie down capability. So thanks for watching.